Hello everyone, and welcome to Starscream's Ghost, a Transformers podcast, your episode-by-episode podcast guide through the classic Transformers Generation 1 cartoon and now Japanese anime continuity. I am Jeremy Graves, and joining me as today we get to discuss a crisis of infinite proportions, you might say, for one character in the show. It is, of course, my partner in crime, my good friend, Mr. Andy Hanley. Good sir, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Unlike Daniel, I'm not facing my biggest crisis ever, so, relatively speaking, all is well.
Indeed, and if you're a first-time listener, thank you very much for giving us a chance. We hope you enjoyed the show, and if you do, why not tell a friend? You can find us on pretty much all the podcast platforms of choice that you like, and also, if you want to check out the video version, if you're only listening to the audio version, head over to YouTube, search for Starscream's Ghost Podcast. You should find our channel just fine, and if you are watching this on YouTube, hey YouTube, how you doing? Because all of our podcast episodes have got a video component of them as well. Sort of getting straight into the weeds of things, as it were. Today, we are discussing 2 episodes in our continuing journey of the Transformers Headmasters series from Japan. It is episodes 17 and 18. More specifically, we are talking about episode 17, SOS From Planet Sandra, and episode 18, Daniel faces his biggest crisis ever. ! I've made sure to make a note of that, Andy, because it's important as far as I'm concerned. So, I guess just to kick things off, buddy, these 2 episodes, it's weird because on the last podcast, when we were going through the TF Wiki notes and we got to the end of the big arc, as it were, and it sort of mentioned, we go planet hopping for a while now, and Scorponok is effectively like a bus, I think was the phrase that the TF Wiki used. I was expecting... I'll just call it like it is. I wasn't expecting perhaps as thought-provoking of episodes as we actually ended in some ways getting, because for all intent and purpose, while these were very simple episodes to watch, I was actually also very intrigued by both the plot devices, the scenarios that they actually came up with.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I kind of wish these plot points had been in sort of like more important episodes, because yeah, like you say, they're really interesting conceits that sort of extend the whole, energy problems that, precipitates all things Transformers. So it's kind of interesting to see it going at that at some different angles, and that's clearly, they've taken that kind of cornerstone of the franchise to heart in a way that, like no one else has really done, and it is at least a bit different from the usual kind of, like new energy source of the week or new weapon of the week kind of thing that is the more sort of typical Transformers fare that we might be used to. So yeah, they're definitely kind of interesting in setup. I think executionally they're a bit more kind of par for the course. It's like, setup happens, Autobots and Decepticons have a big fight, episode ends, although like Daniel's biggest crisis seems like it's actually a 2-part crisis, because we don't really get a resolution to that, so there is that, but above all else, I think that the one thing that none of us knew that we needed to see but we all got to enjoy in this episode is what Galvatron looks like sitting in a big wicker chair. So that was a highlight.
I wasn't expecting you to say that. You could have said a number of things in this, but yeah, it's honestly just very easy watching. But like I say, thought-provoking in some ways. And I guess from there, Andy, there's no more padding needed, really. Let's get straight onto it, because no doubt we're going to end up discussing a heck of a lot about these 2 episodes. So we begin proceedings today with episode 17 of the Japanese Transformers Headmasters series, SOS From Planet Sandra.
See, now I just want to know right off the bat why they chose the name Sandra for a planet. Because 1, who calls a planet Sandra? 2, is this like, and maybe the TF Wiki will help us at this in the end. Is this like some kind of reference to a celebrity or something that the writers liked? Like, is this actually like Planet Sandra Bullock and nobody, nobody wants to have been it? Because it just strikes me like even in like Japanese nomenclature, this is a real weird name for a planet. I'm just saying.
So, I've got a theory about this, which I'll get onto when we get into the story a little bit, because... I'll get onto it when we get into the story, because it's really dumb, but I think it may also be partly due to how we pronounce the name of the planet as well. Like, you probably already figured out what I'm going to say, but we'll get onto that in due course. We begin on planet Char, where Cyclonus and Scourge pick up an SOS signal from a distant planet, which, also Andy, planet Char has a scanner to pick up signals. I'm so shocked I couldn't even figure out how to say that sentence, but that's a new thing we have learned. They discover it is from the planet called Sandra. Neither of them have heard of it before. And the planet in question is asking for help in replenishing their dwindling energy reserves, and apparently they say that they will run out within 1 year. This SOS is brought to Galvatron's attention, which brings on the following dialogue exchange, as they are all inside Scorponok. Cyclonus says to Galvatron, "Do you know planet Sandra?" Scorponok, the omnipotent voice that it is at this point, says, "It doesn't matter whether I know it or not." Galvatron says, "That's true." Scorponok adds, "Better to disregard it than getting involved in other people's business." Which my first thought, Andy, was, you cheeky little bugger. Are you kidding me? After all you've done, that's your answer to this?
Yeah, apparently so.
And then Galvatron's thought to that is, "I think that's the best advice." To which Scorponok's response was simply, "Good."
Yeah, I mean, this is a recurring theme with these episodes as well, where like Galvatron has an opinion, and then you just get the voice of Scorponok to just be like, "That is a good opinion," or "That is a bad opinion. You should revise it." It's just like having like Alexa in the room, but just like judging you at all times.
It's a little interesting detail, but I'm still so used to early on in the Headmaster series where Zarak at the time and Galvatron were sort of at ends with each other, at odds if you were, and now they're just kind of seemingly getting along, and Scorponok doesn't really have much of a choice given how Galvatron returned, as we discussed in a previous podcast. If you're new to the show, go into the archives, you can listen to the episode of Return of the Immortal Emperor to find out how that happened. But it does make me wonder if perhaps Galvatron and Scorponok have had like a secret conversation about like, look, we don't necessarily like each other, but we've got business to do here, so let's just make this work.
Yeah, it does feel a little bit odd because like the setup of Galvatron's return is a very awkward one on both sides, where like, you know, Zarak / Scorponok, because, you know, clearly they'd set themselves up as the head honcho, and suddenly it's like, oh, well, I guess I have no choice but to stand back down here. Whereas Galvatron is also just like, I'm in charge here, but also I'm kind of not at this point, because, I mean, you know, there's a point, I can't remember if it's this episode or the next one, where like Sound Blaster is just like, no, we should do what Scorponok says. And it's just like, you know, there's a clear shift in terms of who's really in charge a little bit, where people aren't just like, what does Galvatron think? There's sort of it's a bit more open season on that than it used to be.
Yeah, I think the point you're referencing when it comes to Sound Blaster is the next episode, because it features a piece of paper, and that's a discussion point in and of itself. So, continuing with the story, with Galvatron having agreed with Scorponok, and as I've just mentioned pretty much for the first time ever, Cyclonus and Scourge say that they will go and investigate. But instead, Galvatron dispatches Ratbat to find out whether or not the Autobots have also picked up the SOS signal. And we get the freaky moment, Andy, where once again we get to see Ratbat talking, which I know you're kind of used to from the comics, I think you mentioned previously. Mm-hmm. I'm still not used to it, so I'm very just like, it's a very jarring experience.
Yeah, no, see, Ratbat is fine. It's just when Laserbeak or Ravage start talking, that's when I get upset. So we didn't have any of that this week, at least.
And Galvatron did his best Captain Picard impression when he told Ratbat to make it so when it came to going to the Autobot HQ.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that's where, like, Picard got his, like, famous saying from. Once again, Transformers invented everything. Like, clearly, Patrick Stewart was sat there watching Headmasters in some Japanese hotel room, and he's just like, that's a good line. One day I shall use this.
Sidebar, if I ever get to have a conversation with Patrick Stewart, I will literally ask him, are you a Transformers fan? And I'll probably be told, what? Or no. And then I'll just have to leave the room at that point. I'll just be escorted out.
Well, we live in hope that one day this can become a reality.
We then head to Athenia, with the narrator saying, quote, as Galvatron suspected, the SOS signal has reached Autobot headquarters. inside the Autobot HQ, we see that Fortress has now mapped the location of the planet, and from the data on screen, Daniel mentions that it actually looks like our solar system. But Fortress responds with the following, quote, "I've never been there, but I've heard of the existence of a parallel solar system." Spike responds with, "So the same beings inhabit their parallel Earth?" Fortress says back, "Exactly. Planet Sandra's natural environment is exactly like that on Earth." We then see the Autobots debating the virtues of aiding Planet Sandra. The Headmasters are in favour of providing transport, but Spike makes it clear that he's not against helping them, but he is unsure if it's wise to sacrifice any of their own limited energy supply, saying, quote unquote, "At current levels, we only have enough for a few decades."
I mean, hey, like I'm glad that that Spike is playing the long game here. Like, you know, it's fair play. But I mean, again, as we mentioned, like this is what one of the really interesting kind of plot points that comes out of this story, because, you know, Transformers is all about, you know, Autobots and Decepticons battling over energy supplies. And it's really interesting that here is like a third-party planet that is also having an energy crisis, which is, you know, quite intriguing in itself. But just like the fact that, again, if this was like the US cartoon, this discussion would not have happened, because it would be straight away like, well, we have to help the planet, we'll just give them whatever they need, which is kind of great as a sort of, you know, you know, pure thinking, like, we're the heroes here. But I really like the fact that there is a bit of kind of grit and reality to this, of like, well, yeah, of course we should help them, but also, can we afford to? Do we actually have the resources to do this without kind of, you know, jeopardizing our own futures? So yeah, it's a really interesting kind of thing for, you know, especially for what is still ostensibly a kid's cartoon. Like, it's quite a kind of, you know, forward and well thought out kind of little back and forth.
Yeah, and by kids' cartoon standards, arguably very mature as a subject as well.
Yeah, well, especially because, like, it's not even just resolved with a quick kind of like, no, we should just do it. Like, you know, basically, you know, they go and do some research, which is incredibly boring for a cartoon about big robots that fight each other. Of just like, well, let's run the numbers. Let me break out Excel, and, you know, we'll do some pivot tables. But that's basically what happens. So thankfully, not too much of it on screen.
So this is where I'll bring my theory in now, because at this point in the episode, which is only maybe about 4-5 minutes in, if that, when they mentioned it's a planet exactly like Earth, but in a parallel universe, as it were, a parallel system, my immediate thought was, it's probably going to be a desert of some kind, isn't it? It's going to look like a desert wasteland. So are we now mispronouncing it? And should it actually be Sandra, as in sand, but they just added ra on the end of it? Maybe it's just like a Japanese pronunciation thing. That was what I was going to say, because I think it's more logical to mention it here.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. I still think they could have found a better name for it than Sandra or Sandra. But yeah, I think that's exactly it. And it's, I mean, maybe it is a deliberate alliteration. Maybe it's just like entirely accidental. But yeah, I think that's exactly what they go for there, which, you know, is quite smart. And by the way, while we're talking about smart, just even the idea that this kind of gets mapped out as a like, oh, this isn't like a parallel world story, but it's just like, yeah, like somewhere in the universe there's probably another solar system the same as Earth's solar system. And like, sure, that actually kind of makes sense, and that's kind of an interesting concept as well. Again, I almost wish this was like a story arc in itself, because you could have had a whole bunch of episodes around kind of like, you know, parallel solar system, especially, I mean, it's not the same as Earth's solar system now, because the Decepticons blew up one of the planets. So, you know, maybe have an episode where they try and steal alternate reality Mars or whatever. I don't know.
It's another interesting point, because thinking back to season 3, as I'm one to do occasionally for a variety of unknown reasons, I kind of thought, when he said a parallel universe, my first thought was going to be, are they bringing back that negative zone-looking place from the Killing Jar?
That would have been cool as well.
Spoiler, everyone, it's not, quite frankly. But there was part of me that's thinking, right, what other parallel universes have we or maybe nearly had? And that was the only one I could think of off the top of my head.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, no, this is very much just kind of like thrown together sort of episode of the week fare, which is a shame because there's quite a few interesting like things that are brought up here that it could have played with quite a lot.
Back to the story. Eventually, after Fortress receives a report from the double agent Transformer we've been seeing a few times now by the name of Punch/Counterpunch, the report says that the Decepticons have definitely received this SOS, but they're just outright ignoring it. But in addition to that, Fortress has now received a report from Ultra Magnus's team on Earth talking about their current energy stockpile levels on their base and such, because they need to, like you say, Andy, do a bit of research. Can they actually justify all of this? And having had that information, they decide to ship the minimum amount of energon cubes that they can spare directly from Earth rather than Athenia's stockpile. And it should also be noted, we also see Ratbat seeing this entire conversation unfold because the Decepticons are good at that kind of thing.
Yeah, it also amused me because I think this is like a subtitle error, but there's at least one point where it gets referred to as an energon cube singular, and it's like, man, how stingy are they being here? They're just gonna send like, here you go, have the energon cube, enjoy.
Yeah, I think I might have pulled one of the quotes from it, but they do literally just say an energon cube, and there's me thinking, in theory, how much energy could an energon cube give? Because that's never really been explored, I don't think. So hypothetically, but still a little bit stingy.
Yeah, how many people can get drunk off of one energon cube is the important question. But also it's just like the idea of the power required to like send, you know, some Transformers or a shuttle or whatever to this planet probably like massively outstrip the single energon cube that it carries.
And another thing as well, we could go on about the whole idea of the parallel world story and the what-if scenario that we've kind of made for ourselves. If the concept of the Shattered Glass series had ever been thought up, this would have been the time to introduce it. Having a parallel world, you have the reverse Transformers, if you will, because, as we find out later on, that seemingly Transformers don't exist in this parallel universe solar system. Yeah,
they could have had, like, parallel wheelie that's actually useful, for example.
I'm trying to think. Do you reckon they'd have different names, or would they just still be called the same?
Yeah, no, they'd have the names from the Omni Productions dub.
So be Billy or something. Then
it'd just be different every 5 minutes. They just constantly have different names.
Back to the story once again. I appreciate we're doing a lot of sidebars today, folks, but it's worth it, in my opinion. But we've had that conversation. It's all been decided and whatnot. But Daniel and Wheelie, speaking of, request that they be allowed to go with the aid party too. Wheelie specifically saying, quote unquote, "We won't get in the way, we'll help." Which, my initial reaction was,
Yeah, I mean, I do really enjoy, and I think this is quite deliberate, kind of like Fortress's face when that question is asked. Like, you can kind of see the gears turning of like, how do I say this? How do I say no in the most unequivocal way that also won't upset these kids? And he's just like desperately trying to find a way out of this where he doesn't have to like send these idiots on this mission.
I can regale what he said if you want, because I did write down the conversation.
Oh, please do.
So Fortress's first response after thinking for a moment was, "It'll be your first space voyage." Which my reaction is, no, it won't.
I mean, yeah, again, this is maybe like a weird kind of like, well, it's not really, because even the movie, like, I mean, Daniel and Wheelie both did some planet hopping. So yeah, no, it's like, I guess Fortress wasn't around. He probably assumed like they'd never let these idiots like travel to a different planet. So I guess they've probably never been anywhere.
Daniel literally was sent to blow up a mini satellite or whatnot that was going to kill the Transformers.
Yeah, although I suppose like a satellite technically doesn't count as a planet, so I'll give Fortress that one. But you know, yeah, he's clearly he missed a lot while he wasn't around. Some stuff happened, Fortress. You don't want to know.
And then Daniel, in response to the space voyage line, very defiantly says, "It's all right, we won't get in the way."
Again, famous last words.
And then Chrome Dome, being the ever helpful headmaster that he is the one to say, "Let them come. We're not going into battle." And then Spike adds to it, being the reliable father that he is, just goes, "Yeah, it could be a valuable experience for them."
Yeah. I mean, just probably just desperate. Well, in Chrome Dome's case, it's probably just trying to impress Arcee. Of just like, well, if I say nice things about Daniel, maybe she'll notice me.
So with Spike, and I guess Carly's approval at this point, she doesn't get a say in the matter, quite frankly. That will come back again in a topic of conversation a bit later. But Fortress then says, fine, you are permitted to go. But as mentioned earlier, everything has been witnessed by Rat-Bat, who informs Galvatron of the Autobots' plan of action, saying that the Autobots are wasting their time, and it's stupid to give precious energy away to total strangers. Galvatron then proclaims that all of Earth's energy, in fact, belongs to the Decepticons, and he now wants to prevent the Autobots from sending the energy from Earth to Sandra. Which is a really weird way of holding on to your long-term investment, Andy.
Yeah. It's also kind of weird how, like, you know, this wasn't, like, the original ploy of the Decepticons. Because, like, you know that the Autobots are going to send something. Like, there's a 99% chance that they're going to help out on this planet and that it's going to involve energy. So it's sort of weird that their first, like, port of call was just like, we'll just ignore it and see what happens. You'd have thought this would have been their default of just like, no, we should prepare. But I guess that would make the episode less interesting and not give Rat-Bat anything to do. So, you know, fair play.
We then head to Earth, and then we look on and we see Dino Base, aka Trypticon, with the narrator saying, quote unquote, Galvatron knows that an Energon cube, that's the line, that Energon cubes will be shipped from Earth. So he heads to Earth himself. We see Galvatron coordinating the Decepticon forces with Sixshot, while Ultra Magnus oversees the Protectobots and Technobots as they load Energon cubes onto the Trainbots. Now, I don't know if you noticed the animation error here, Andy. It's very, very weird, but Ultra Magnus is talking to Shoki, I believe it is, of the Trainbots, but there's a brief moment where he's talking to Twincast, and then Twincast also arrives in the scene towards them. I don't know if you noticed it.
Yeah, I don't think I did here, but I do recall, like, that's definitely one that I've seen kind of crop up on the internet as, like, a particularly egregious animation error before.
But for the benefit of our video listeners, I will quickly put a screenshot of it on screen so you can see it.
Yeah, it's particularly good because, like, Twincast is just saying, like, oh, hi, me.
It's very random, but I wanted to make a note of it because it's just one of those ones where you sort of do a double take and go, hey, wait, what?
Yeah, I guess it's one of those, like, in the era of cell animation, I can understand that happening, because obviously every character's a different cell that's overlaid on it, and somebody probably just didn't think about it, and by the time they noticed, it was too late. Like, this is probably the kind of thing that happens a lot less in this era of kind of, like, digital animation, where you're not doing that stuff, because someone will notice straight away, like, oh, you put the wrong character in there, or the person doing it will be like, oh, well, I've got two of the same guy here. But yeah, nevertheless, always entertaining when it happens.
So we see Twincast arrive to inform them that Galvatron is on Earth, but his warning comes too late, as Galvatron, the Terracons, and the Constructicons making a random appearance, swoop down out of the sky and open fire. We get some fun action here, and it kind of almost felt like a Transformers episode of old, Andy, because we're on Earth, we've got a nice big firefight going on, we get some close quarters combat between the two leaders, in this case Galvatron and Ultra Magnus, we get some combiner teams facing each other, and including a fun moment where I think it was Abominus literally gets its head kicked clean off by Computron, which is a fun little moment.
Yeah, no, that was pretty good. And yeah, like, there's a pretty good action scene. And to be fair, like, this episode had some pretty good animation moments to it. And yeah, like, that was definitely, there was a feeling, I had the exact same thought of, like, this is the most sort of G1 Transformers action scene I feel like we've had from this series, because it did have a lot of vibes of those, like, earlier episodes.
Yeah, it was a good feeling as well, I've got to say. Like, a nice bit of nostalgia at this point.
Yeah. Like, as much as I sort of like the sort of more, like, pro wrestling vibe that, like, Headmasters often goes with, like, it was kind of fun to have a bit more kind of, like, laser battles and still have some of the close quarters stuff as well. It was a good mix.
We see the Trainbots trying to make a break for it as the Combiners and the leaders brawl, but Sixshot appears and shoots them out of the sky, saying specifically, quote-unquote, "You'll only get past me over my dead body," which the Trainbots are a bit horrified by, quite frankly.
Yeah, I mean, guess they weren't around for the movie either, so... You know.
News of this attack reaches Athenia, and they know that the Decepticons want to steal the energy for themselves, as we come to find out the Decepticons aren't exactly swimming in Energon either, which hasn't really been brought up to this point, Andy. Like, we should know based on I'll say the transition between sort of season 3 and where we get to when the series starts. But given that Char actually looks like it's got a built-up, city now, I didn't expect it to be that prominent of a detail.
Yeah, I mean, I guess all the plasma energy they collected all went to, like, Scorponok and to, like, booting him up, as it were. So I suppose that makes sense. Because, yeah, like, I hadn't really thought about it, but yeah, like, my default assumption is usually the Decepticons have very little energy, but then you think about the events of recent episodes, it's like, surely he must have quite a lot at this point. But yeah, I guess Scorponok is just like, he has bad Mars per gallon or whatever.
Yeah, of which I will reiterate, folks, I know we're watching a kid's cartoon, but I do pay attention to stuff like this, I'm just saying. So, Fortress has an idea, and after checking over some data on the computer, he says, quote unquote, Athenia's stockpiles are about the same as Earth's. To which Spike then says, do you want to ship the energy from Athenia? Fortress says, to divert the enemy's attention. Spike says, but then Athenia will have nothing. Fortress says, Galvatron will come in pursuit. Let's move it from Earth to Athenia. Spike says, good idea. We can rebuild the energy on Athenia. At this exact moment, Andy, Jeremy here, watching this episode at this point, is just thinking, you could have avoided all of this if you'd have just thought about this earlier.
Yeah. It's like you've already booked the FedEx delivery and now you want it shipped somewhere different, and I'm going to have to call them up and go through all the paperwork again. This is a lot of effort.
But also, Spike was against the idea of using Athenia's energy, and now in this context, he's fine with it and has figured out a way to resolve it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Again, I mean, we've talked about this as a recurring theme of, like, the Autobots kind of management not being great in this show, and this is kind of another one of those of, like, yeah, this is just not very efficient. You could probably have sorted this out a lot more smoothly with a little bit more thought.
Fair. But anyway, once again, back to the story. As mentioned, Fortress and Spike make now the TF Wiki called it the difficult decision, but given the way we've recapped this, I'm just going to say the decision to send Athenia's own energy to Sandra instead, while the Decepticons' attention is on Earth. We see the battle continuing on Earth, but then suddenly Magnus orders his troops to unload the Energon from the train bots, confusing Galvatron quite substantially, should be said. Sixshot immediately suspects that something is up, and just nonchalantly says, maybe they're launching from Athenia instead. And then we see that Battleship Maximus has left Athenia with the energy on board. Daniel is excited about the trip and their destination, saying, wow, they say it's just like Earth, but will they understand us? And Spike, of course, being the great motivator that we know he can be and is Andy, simply says, we'll manage somehow.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, that is peak Spike. Just like, whatever, it'll sort itself out. I mean, my thought was like, nobody will ever understand you, Daniel. You're beyond comprehension. But anyway.
But Galvatron sends Scorponok, who he had kept on standby, he said, for just such an occasion. Because, Galvatron's smart like that. And sends Scorponok after the Autobots. When the battle erupts in space, it begins with the two Headmaster teams fighting each other outside Battleship Maximus. Fortress then has Wheelie, Spike, and Daniel board a small shuttle, intending for them to sneak away with the Energon on board while all the villains are busy fighting them, as it were. Now, during the battle, we get a cool little concept, Andy, which I'm glad they finally introduced, and I was wondering if they were going to do it at some point. It's the idea that, as we've spoken about before, the Headmasters, if I just call it that, is the head. And that transforms into like a little body, if you will. We've talked about this before. And the actual bodies are called transectors. They finally just essentially used their transectors in their car forms as dummy, like, robots, as it were. Because they transformed, hid underneath them, then sort of pushed off and then got inside the shuttle while the other Decepticon Headmasters were still chasing the car part of the Autobot bodies. I'm really happy they finally done something like this, because I've been waiting for it to happen.
Yeah, it's quite a smart little thing. Be interesting to see if this ever happens again. Because if there's one thing we know from this series, they do something cool, and then that's the last we see of it. Because when that first started happening, I thought this was maybe going to be some weird animation error because they transformed into their car form and then the kind of the head tucked in robot form, like tucked in underneath, and I'm like, what's going on here? And it's like, oh, okay, this is actually a ploy. I kind of like this.
It was good fun. So having boarded the shuttle in their small robot forms, the group on board travel with their cargo, and the fighting continues behind them in the distance. We then approach the dimensional rift. Now, we've seen lots of interesting animation things, Andy, when it comes to the space bridge. We've seen Transformers bending in weird ways because of like a weird looking like asteroid heading towards them. We've seen all kinds of things, and all we get for this is a little swirl on screen. I was very disappointed.
Yeah, this felt like either they just didn't have time to do anything interesting, or we didn't have the inclination to. Because we've had some pretty cool visual effects. We get some pretty cool stuff like across these two episodes as a whole. This was not one of those cool things. This was just very perfunctory.
Yeah, it's almost like they spent all the money on the explosion budget.
Yeah, which, I mean, to be fair, it was worth every penny, so, every yen, I should say.
Having gone through the dimensional rift, they proceed to Sandra and make contact with the planet and get clearance to land. Their transmission is responded by a man on planet Sandra, who simply responds with, "This is Sandra," to which I thought, are you?
Again, maybe the joke doesn't work quite so well in Japanese, but it was, they missed an opportunity there.
Which they then add on to that. We've been waiting for a response to our message. I will advise you where to land when you are in closer proximity. Excuse me. Take care.
I did like the slightly passive aggressive, like, we've been waiting a while for you to respond. Like, you could have emailed us back a bit sooner. I felt like there was a bit of needle to that. Like, it took your time, didn't you?
See, the way the dialogue was, and maybe this is just the way it's translated for us, based on the DVDs that we're watching from, but when they said, I will advise you where to land when you are in closer proximity, my initial thought was, are you going to be a bad guy? Because that seems oddly specific. You want them to be closer before you tell them.
I did wonder that as well, especially given all the playing up. Like, oh, this is sort of like a parallel version of our solar system where it's basically the same, but maybe not entirely. And it's like, oh, maybe this is going to be like, the alternate Earth guys are going to be the baddies, and there's going to be an interesting thing here. Because I definitely had that same thought process as well.
As their shuttle begins to enter the atmosphere, we, the viewer, are made aware that the battle that they left behind it past the dimensional rift, if you will, has ended, and Fortress is on the way. We now get our first glimpse of the planet. What will a parallel Earth in a different dimension look like? The answer simply, it's a desert wasteland. Jeremy at this point was like, "Oh, I was right." A little bit disappointed, I won't lie.
Yeah. The animators, on the other hand, were probably thrilled that this was the direction that they went with. It's like, oh, good. Well, if there's one thing that's easy to draw, it's lots of deserts. So we're here for this.
Hence the reason we saw so many of them before, Andy.
Exactly.
Spike's exact quote about what it looks like is, "It's like a desert wasteland. No wonder their resources are running out." Daniel then says, "It's nothing like Earth." Wheelie adds, "It's awful."
Thanks, Wheelie. I mean, I do. If there's one thing I appreciate from Wheelie, it's just like, it says it straight. Everyone else is at least dancing around it a bit. It's like, no, this planet sucks.
So, the Energon cubes are successfully delivered, and we then go inside a building. And, as mentioned, Daniel and Spike in particular are very dismayed to see what the planet has become. And the group are met by a trio of Sandra representatives, including the person on the transmission from earlier. And we get the following dialogue exchange. And for the purposes of this, because we never find out their names, I'm going to refer to various people by letters A, B, and C, just to preface this. A. Decades ago, we did have a modern culture here. In retrospect, maybe we lived extravagantly. B says, we believed our resources were inexhaustible and used more than was necessary. Spike then comes back and says, is that so? Resources are always finite. They get used up or simply dry out. Sorry for my impertinence, but will Earth face the same destiny? A says, surely not. Which I'm like, how do you know? You're in a parallel world.
Yeah, like you've literally only just heard of Earth and you're already passing judgment.
B then says, for decades, we have researched new energy sources. Spike's response, good.
I mean, again, from the Wheelie school of responses, really.
C then comes in and says, research will be completed in 7 years, but we need new energy before then. Spike then says, wonderful. There's a good reason to offer you help then.
Yeah, which I like the intimation that if it was just like, no, we've got no plan B, it's like, well, tough then, I guess.
And then it concludes with A saying, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. So it's one of those weird conversations where it was a very matter-of-fact conversation, but ultimately it actually did justify them helping the planet because they are actually trying to sort the mess out that they're in. And have admitted to their own mistakes as well.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like some nice little vignettes in there of just like the whole, clear like environmental bit within this episode of just like, yeah, we just like used our energy willy-nilly and then we ran out, oops. Which, there's an obvious kind of, real life analogy there. And then, yeah, like the idea that they didn't just, it's not just, especially given like the Autobots can't afford to give them much, like the idea is like, oh, it's not that we're kind of reliant on other people's energy forever. This is just like to plug the hole until our research kind of comes online. Like, it feels like it all makes a lot more sense than just sometimes with this kind of thing you kind of get the like, we've run out of energy, here, have some energy, yay, the problem's solved. And it's like, well, no, it's not, because that energy is going to run out, and then what do you do? Whereas at least this feels like it has a through line, like, which we will never see. I'm sure we're not going to ever return to Planet Sandra, but like at least you can kind of get the feeling like, oh, this is a world that started before we encountered it in this show, and it will go on afterwards. And that's kind of nice, like, and very, again, pretty unusual for like a kids cartoon episode that usually has no kind of interest in such things.
I wonder if they have their version of the battle beasts in this universe.
I mean, yeah, who can say? Maybe that was their problem, that they didn't have any battle beasts.
With the conversation having concluded, Person A looks outside the window and sees something in the sky. It's Fortress Maximus, but unfortunately with Scorponok, Galvatron, and the Decepticon Headmasters hot on his tail. While the two giants fight, and also Andy, quite frankly, are just destroying some buildings, the few that the planet seemingly has left. Nice job, guys. Chrome Dome and Hardhead use their diminutive stature, to sneak explosives onto the back of Scorponok, which explode. Though I should say, Andy, the explosion budget was clearly not here in this episode because there wasn't much of an explosion. Mm-hmm. And the body is badly damaged. And then they end up recombining in their transectors, that being the Headmasters, I should say, the Autobots. And they join in the fighting with the Decepticons, against the Decepticons, forcing them to retreat. With the battle ended, the Autobots, Spike, and Daniel, and apparently Carly, who's randomly on the ship as well for the first time, but sure, whatever, are waving goodbye. But as they're about to leave, the delegates of Sandra reiterate their thanks and vow to press on with their new research. As the episode is ending with Fortress Maximus flying away, the narrator says the following. Spike and Daniel had learnt a valuable lesson. The beauty of sharing the little you have with others. It seems simple, but it requires courage and determination. And fade to black. And then we get the cheesy outro music.
Yeah, share your energy, kids. Lesson of the day.
Just don't get drunk. And that was the episode. Like, it's weird, like you alluded to at the very beginning of the podcast today. It does just kind of end. As far as endings go, it does just feel... It's almost going very old school now, Andy, in the sense of there was a pretty good build-up to this. There was a lot of potential for where this could go. and then it just ends.
Yeah, I mean, given the pacing, like you would have forgiven them for making this a two-parter, and to be like, the cliffhanger is Fortress Maximus with Scorponok etc. in pursuit, and then they have to join forces with the Sandrians. I'm going to call them Sandrians, and to figure something out. I don't know. Like, yeah, again, the fact there's some collateral damage here to make a bit more of that, of like, you destroyed our only building, and what are you going to do about it? Because like, reset the counter to 0 days since the Autobots accidentally destroyed something expensive. I mean, it used to happen all the time on Earth. But yeah, because there's enough to this that they could actually have made an extra 20 minutes of this. And to done some more stuff with it. So yeah, it's kind of a shame that it just sort of ends with an abrupt, yep, cool, we got the Energon Cube, thanks. Probably need it to rebuild the buildings we destroyed, but whatever, cheers.
So from there, Andy, let's venture over to the TF Wiki to see if maybe there's a few interesting trivia notes, maybe it can clarify a few details. Let's see what they have to say about the episode in question. Continuity notes. Punch's double agent status was established in Return of the Immortal Emperor. Despite being a bit of a doof when backed into a corner, Punch continues to be quite effective and important for much of the story arc that is about to begin. Oh, okay, that's cool. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I said, like, even as a kid, I really liked the idea of, like, double agent Transformer, but, like, he's kind of used quite effectively in this show, for that exact reason. Like, I don't know, I always love a good double agent.
Oh, was there actually ever a toy of Punch?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there was a counter-punch toy. Like, I don't think it ever came to the UK, maybe, but, I mean, he definitely turned up in, like, the comics, as far as I recall.
I'm just always wondering, how would that work from a transformation perspective? Like, is it can either turn into a different color, or does it change into the car and then a different color? Like,
I think it was as boringly simple as, like, they just made it a flippable panel on his insignia, and maybe there were some other bits that you could kind of transform and just, like, twist around so he looked a bit different.
So it's the old Jetfire Skyfire thing.
Yeah, I just sort of recall it being, it was just like an insignia flip kind of thing, but I could be wrong. I don't know. I should probably look that up at some point.
Trivia notes. Right, this is a long one, so bear with me. When voicing his opinion on the Sandra situation, Scorponok speaks through his city mode transector for the first time as an echoing disembodied voice. Up to this point, all of Scorponok's interactions with his fellow Decepticons has been done while in his small robot form. But this is the beginning of a trend that continues throughout the upcoming story arc, where the small robot does not appear on screen, apart from in transformation sequences. And the character is simply treated as a giant transforming spaceship. This comes at the same point in time that his role in the series is reduced to simply ferrying the Decepticons from planet to planet and fighting Fortress Maximus a bit. So perhaps it was done to make this a bit more palatable. Once this story ends, though, the small robot returns to the fore to carry on with his own plans. So that actually answers that question then we were sort of alluding to earlier.
Yeah. It is weird as a like, narrative decision, but yeah, I guess it works for the best for them.
I just assumed he was on the bridge.
Yeah, I assumed he was just kicking around, just, I don't know, repairing his fog machine or whatever.
Next note. This episode is the first to depict any of the Headmasters besides Scorponok or Fortress as spending time apart from their transectors. Chrome Dome and Hardhead even use their small robots to tactical advantage. So there we go. I'm glad we made note of that then. That was worth it. Right, that's the next note. Let's see what we have here. Although it may be due to translation inconsistencies, Planet Sandra wavers between simply being an Earth-like planet in a parallel solar system, quote-unquote, to a full-blown alternate reality version of Earth. If the latter is the correct interpretation, the Autobots seem exceedingly casual about travelling to an entirely different reality.
Yeah, because that is the weird thing, because, I mean, as much as we complained about the lack of effects of them kind of, entering this parallel solar system, the fact that there's anything weird that happens at all and they're not just flying to a different part of the universe suggests that there is some kind of weird, like alternate parallel universe shit going on here. And yeah, it's definitely inconsistent, and that should definitely be a bigger deal if they're actually just like, we're going to go to another dimension.
They also add here, they're more bothered about giving away their precious, precious energy.
Their Energon cube.
Foreign localization. Well, I can tell you, Andy, across the board, it's pretty much identical. In Italian, it's literally just SOS from Planet Sandra. I believe it's also meant to be Mandarin, although it's noted as Italian on the TF Wiki page here. It's also SOS from Planet Sandra. In the Omni Productions dub, it's called An SOS from a Lost Planet.
Okay.
Which is not too bad.
It's not really lost, but anyway.
Then, in the Shout Factory subtitle version, I believe this is, episode title is the same. Then it notes here, as is expected at this point, the mini cassettes are called deployers. And it says Sparks is used in place of lives at one point.
Oh, I mean, I guess Sparks was kind of a thing more generally maybe at the time this got dubbed, but that seems a little bit ahead of its time.
That's a subtitle thing from Shout Factory, though. So,
but I mean, I guess that was after kind of other Transformers media started to use the idea of Sparks as being like the soul or whatever of a Transformer. So it's probably pans out timeline wise. I'm sure. I'm willing to argue that this series invented a lot of things, but I'm not gonna argue that they invented Sparks.
Yeah, I'm always trying to think at this point, when would Sparks have been introduced?
Yeah, because I can't. I mean, because I remember it being the thing with like the Michael Bay Transformers movies. I can't remember whether it was ever in. I think it was in like the comic continuity at some point. I don't know. It's all a blur and not the character.
Yeah, I'm just trying to have a quick gander on the TF Wiki. Sparks is also a target master, very confusing.
And yes, there is. It's quite cool actually.
Yeah, all right, you know what? We might come back to that on another day then, because that might be a bit too much of a rabbit hole to go down. But otherwise, Andy, that concludes this particular episode discussion. So do you have any other additional notes that you had? Any other random sightings of Transformers on the screen that you want to note?
I will say I have just looked up the G1 toy of Punch/Counterpunch, and it's actually a little bit cooler than I remembered. So Punch transforms into blue Pontiac Fiero. He has 2 distinct robot modes with separate guns and rub signs for each. They have separate arms, but the backs of Punch's torso, legs, and even head are the front of Counterpunch's, and vice versa. Top of their shared head tilts to disguise the face not currently being used. So it wasn't just the rub signs, it was actually like the robot mode had like the 2 color schemes, and they were just kind of like flipped versions of each. So yeah, it was a pretty cool toy.
That's really cool, actually. There you go. Add that to your list, I guess, for future purchases.
Yes, indeed. And of course, there have been like a multitude of other like Punch, versions over the years. But yeah, that was the OG Takara toy.
Oh, there we go. I'll have to look that up at some point. So from there, everybody, we are now going to advance to episode 18. It's the one we've been building up to since our last podcast. Daniel faces his biggest crisis ever. Let's see what we're in for, folks. You may be surprised at what's about to happen. We begin, again, at Planet Char, when the Decepticons' early warning systems detect 2 UFOs on screen, and upon looking at the screen when they're trying to get a visual picture of them, they appear to look like jets of some kind entering the planet's atmosphere. The Decepticon headmasters leap to the conclusion the Autobots are launching an attack on them. The headmasters proceed to open fire on the 2 unidentified jet robots, but they easily avoid the shots, land, and I've got to say, Andy, some superb animation on the landing as well. Like, the animation budget in this episode suddenly went up. It was mental.
I have this weird feeling that the actual like landing gear animation might have been lifted from another show, though. It looks just different enough that it's like, I don't think you guys made this. I think you've found some stock like banked cells from another title somewhere. Like it's probably from like Macross or something, and
it looks so crisp.
Yeah, and it looks so different to everything else. But that said, the jet modes of the Transformers that are about to be introduced, I forgot how rad they are in cartoon form. Like the toys were kind of a disappointment in comparison, I seem to recall. Like they're not as sleek and cool. But yeah, I forgot that these guys had really cool jet modes. I was like, oh yeah, like I'd forgotten that, like I'd forgotten these characters were triple changes, to be quite frank with you.
So let's get on to it then. After these mysterious robots make very short work of the Decepticon Headmasters, Galvatron then comes out and says, "Ah, ha, 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 ha. Can't you lot tell friend from foe?" And all of a sudden, it becomes clear they are in fact Decepticons. Galvatron reveals that these two new robots are the Horrorcons, Apeface and Snapdragon, who he had summoned to bolster their forces. We come to find out through dialogue that, from Weirdwolf specifically, that they are in fact, that being the Decepticon Headmasters, familiar with the Horrorcons, literally saying as a quote, "You were expelled from Planet Master along with us." But what the Decepticons don't know as all of this is happening is that the Autobot double agent Punch, in his Counterpunch Decepticon form, was watching on and informs the Autobots on Athenia that the Horrorcons have arrived. The Autobots recall how they used to be friends on Planet Master with the Horrorcons, but these two villains were allies of Scorponok, aka Zarak, and they had been exiled to space for crimes that they had committed. Chrome Dome, adding, quote unquote, "I later heard rumours that they were roaming outer space together." Fortress now suspects that Galvatron has a bigger plan in mind, but he doesn't know what it is just yet. Just to focus on the debut of the Horrorcons, Andy, gotta say, I freaking love how these look, both in jet mode and in their animal forms, both as an ape and a dragon. They just look so damn cool. Their names are cool. And if I'd have ever had a chance to get these, though you've now told me the toys are a bit naff, so oh well. But in terms of concepts of triple changes, freaking great. Love it.
Yeah, no, they were always, I feel like they were always pretty cool in like the G1 comics as well. But yeah, like this was kind of the era where the toys were getting particularly plasticky, and because they were triple changes, they were quite chunky as well. And like you see those sleek jet modes in the cartoon and you're just like, oh, I want these guys. But then they're really kind of big and bulky and kind of way less sleek in person, and it's like the robot and kind of like, you know, animal modes are still pretty cool, but like the jets were kind of like the afterthought, it felt like, so they were never quite as good. But yeah, also like I always feel like Snapdragon was one of my like favorite just Transformer names, of just like, that's just a really good name, that's cool. But also yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy on two levels. That one, the Decepticon Headmasters don't notice the Decepticon insignias on these guys until it's explicitly pointed out to them. They're just like, oh yeah, I guess they've got Decepticon logos on. It's like, guys, how long have you been fighting in this war? Like, this is the one thing you need to remember about any Transformer is like, see what insignia they have on them, and B, then it's just like, oh yeah, and we used to be buddies. It's like, well, how did you make this mistake on multiple levels? I don't understand.
Yeah, see, this is a weird one now, but part of me wonders, was Snapdragon a play on words because maybe how you had to transform the toy?
I mean, if you transform him wrong, then he definitely becomes Snapdragon, I suspect. But yeah,
I can't follow that. You win.
I have no idea. I think it's just a cool name, and he has a kind of like dragon animal mode. So,
continuing with the story. In the midst of the discussion as to what the Decepticons are up to, we see Spike looking, I'll say, very directly at the monitor. And then suddenly, he makes an announcement. Quote unquote, "Fortress, I propose to negotiate with Galvatron." And then we proceed to get a whole string of shocked-looked faces with coloured backgrounds behind them, and it is wonderful, quite frankly, the reactions we're getting.
Yeah, given that we're recording this episode a little bit after April 1st, like I feel like this would have been a really good like April Fool's gambit from Spike, and he's like, "Ah, got you, not really." But no, apparently not April the 1st in this episode, and he was entirely serious, which is just like, I am literally speechless to try and like understand or comprehend. Like I know he makes his best play as to why he has suggested this, and I kind of get it, but also Galvatron, this is like a really bad plan from like minute one.
So let's get on to what he is actually trying to put across then, because obviously everyone is shocked. And Spike makes it clear he's being serious about this, and he wants to arrange to personally negotiate with Galvatron in the hopes that the Autobots and the Decepticons can work together to build a new energy generation program. Which, on a surface level, Andy, you're like, given what we saw in the last episode, that, you know, clearly energy reserves are low, they've only got a couple of decades worth and such, you're like, okay, you know what? I can kind of get Spike's thinking, and maybe him having gone to Planet Sandra has maybe kind of hit him home far more than anybody realised. So if we're talking from a continuity perspective, I could totally get on a surface level why he is thinking this.
Yeah, oh yeah, I mean, there's definitely a certain level of logic to it, but also, like, let's negotiate with the party that literally blew up their home planet for energy. Probably not going to go great.
Yeah, well, you mentioned that, actually, so let's get more of the conversation, because I did actually write all of it down, because I think it's very good for discussion. Chrome Dome says, and speaks for the Headmasters as a whole, saying, Spike, you're dreaming. Do you think the Decepticons will agree to work... Fun typo. It says, do you think the Decepticons will agree to work with Bus?
Is that Scorponok now?
There you go. I'll try that again and do an edit on that. Chrome Dome speaks for the Headmasters by saying, Spike, you're dreaming. Do you think the Decepticons will agree to work with us on energy development? Spike responds immediately with, we'll have to discuss and see. I have thought long and hard about this. We just have to negotiate with them. The Decepticons blew up Cybertron. They even blew up Mars, of which we, the viewer, get to relive the destruction of both planets briefly. We fight for energy, but if we destroy more planets, the universe will be finished. During the destruction of Mars, the space bridge destabilized the forces of gravity. Shoki, the trainbot leader, then says, that's right, it will become useless if the distortion is exacerbated. Spike then continues, this proves the balance of the universe has been disturbed. To save the universe from destruction, we must join forces with the Decepticons to develop more energy. Please support the plan, Fortress. As far as reasons and justifications go, he's got a pretty good argument, as ridiculous as it does sound.
Oh yeah, I mean, he certainly makes a good play for it. Like, you know, who knew Spike was like the ace of his like high school debating society, like on the sly. We thought he was just an idiot mechanic's son, but apparently not. I mean, how far he has come from the days of like, you know, season 1 and 2 of the cartoon. Like now he's making, you know, these grandiose speeches about the future of the universe. Quite proud of him, to be fair.
Now, with Spike having pleaded his case, and also during the course of that, Andy, randomly like bringing up the fact that the space bridge is now very unstable, which is an element that is going to get explored further in this episode, but that's another detail that hasn't been mentioned before, and will definitely be having consequences as no doubt the series progresses. But the reason I mention this is because Spike's now pleaded his case, and I'm going to assume, Andy, that given the episode is what? If you include opening and ending, it's probably about 20 minutes, if that. That's the duration. Spike's soliloquy took up most of the broadcast time of this episode. So because of that, the narrator then very quickly chimes in and just says, Spike's earnest persuasion convinces Commander Fortress. It's one of the most obvious times when I've just thought, yep, that ran long, didn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a very useful just segue into like, okay, well, let's skip to the next bit. This was quite nice and cheap to animate, so we've got more time for all these explosions later.
So, a communication from the Autobots via Teletran 1, which, I'm just going to say it now, I swear Teletran 1 was destroyed, but at this point I don't remember what continuity it happened in, so I'm just going to carry on.
Yeah, I guess that was season 3 of the G1 cartoon, so yeah, maybe they just kind of, that doesn't officially count here. Or was... No, I think it was G1, wasn't it? It wasn't like a rebirth thing. But yeah, anyway, as far as we're concerned, Teletran 1 doesn't exist anymore, so I don't know what's going on here.
For the purposes of discussion going forward, I will simply say, a communication from the Autobots via Teletran soon reaches Char. But before we see the Decepticon response to this, we get a conversation with Daniel and Spike, which unfolds as follows. Daniel says, "It's worrying." Spike's response, "Huh?" Daniel says, "But Dad, you're going to negotiate with Galvatron." Spike says, "That's right. I'm going as a neutral negotiator. I'm the most suitable person."
I mean, and again, this does come back to bite him quite hard. But like the idea that Spike is in any way neutral in this whole thing, like, I mean, again, this is a classic like, where is Marissa Fairborn question, because she could argue that she is truly neutral, like she's a space cop or whatever it is, like she could argue that she can represent humanity but also with a wider view of the universe. Like Spike has literally been like aiding and abetting the Autobots for several decades at this point, so the idea of like, I am neutral is like, no, you're really not.
Bring back DevCon. Yeah. He'll be neutral. So Daniel then says, in response to that line that Spike is being a neutral negotiator, "But they're Decepticons!" Spike then says, "Somebody has to do it sooner or later. Peace does not happen by itself. Do you understand, Daniel?" To which Daniel, nodding, just goes, "Mm-hmm." I bring this up, everybody, because when it comes to parenthood, in the case of Spike and Carly with young Daniel, we've seen little glimpses of things happen, be it in season 3, be it in the show of this series Headmasters so far. We've seen some interesting things occur. Just keep in mind how Spike was talking to Daniel just a moment ago, because this parenthood conversation will continue later in this episode to a unique degree. But what of Galvatron's response, you must be wondering? Well, he reads the message from a bit of paper, which, I'm going to be honest, Andy, if it's a bit of paper in Galvatron's hands, it must be like 10 trees worth.
Yeah, you kind of want you do want a real world measure. Like, how big is the Decepticon fax machine? Like, what size? Because you can get to like A0 paper, I guess. But like, are there sizes above that for Transformers? I don't know. Maybe it has to like glue them all together as it goes. It's just like lots of A0 sheets that will get sort of fused together to make a fax. I don't know.
And his response is simply, "A joint energy development program? The Autobots must be out of their minds." Then crumples the paper and throws it behind him in disgust, which Sound Blaster catches, and then simply just says, "Shall we refuse their offer?" Just kind of making sure at this point, because if Sound Blaster, or even when he was Soundwave, knows Andy, Galvatron can say one thing but mean 20 other different things at the same time. And then Galvatron confirms this though by simply going, "No need, just ignore it." Not even going to give him a response.
I mean, the recurring theme of these episodes from Galvatron is just like, just ignore it. Can't be bothered.
It's like too much effort. But then the disembodied voice of Scorponok then speaks up and says, "You could consider this an opportunity. We can negotiate with them and attack at the same time." Sound Blaster agrees with this thought and urges Galvatron to respond to the Autobots. A response is sent back to Athenia. He agrees to the meeting, but with one condition: that Spike bring Daniel and Carly with him. Perturbed by this request, I think is the word to use, the Headmasters come along as guards. And as we see them board the train bots, the narrator adds, quote unquote, "The negotiations with Galvatron are going to be concluded on Earth. Spike and family depart for Earth. We now get our first glimpse of the space bridge in action following what we were told about earlier. And don't forget, this is also following the destruction of both Cybertron and Mars. The train bots enter, the bridge activates, and that wonderful purple hue of light that we have come accustomed to since pretty much literally the beginning of Transformers. It's no longer that colour. It's kind of more like a flame red-orange-like colour, clearly not in a good way. And we see them actually travelling through the portal of the space bridge, and there are distortions aplenty, lightning bolts going all around them. And the narrator actually notes, as we see both inside and outside the train bots, that everyone is being affected by impulses from the distortions. We then arrive on Earth. I was going to say at the location. It's Earth. And we come to find out, Andy, it's on Shangri-La Island in the South Pacific.
Yeah, there's probably the real reason Spike wanted this. He just wanted a jolly away. It's just like, yes, let's hold it on this extravagant desert island that I've always wanted to go on holiday. So, oh, and my family have to come as well. Wow, how convenient.
Holiday!
Yeah, so this is just like going to be like some kind of expenses scandal, like in the next episode. It'd be found out Spike's actually just been, misappropriating Autobot funds for trips away.
You're clearly not neutral. When they arrive, they are met by Galvatron, the Decepticon Headmasters, and the newly joined duo of the Horrorcons. The conversation unfolds as follows, Galvatron saying, "Spike, we'll hold your family hostage until the talks are over." Chrome Dome says, "Spike, that wasn't what we agreed." Galvatron says, "Don't meddle." Spike, "If you don't like it, I'll leave." Spike then goes, "Wait. All right, I'll do as you say." And Carly simply responds just by going, "Darling." No emotion, just that.
Yeah, just mentally trying to remember where the divorce papers are back at home, I suspect. But again, I mean, to be fair, this would have been so exciting if this was like OG, like G1 Carly, because it's just like, yeah, you try.
She's a badass.
Yeah, you like try holding her ransom for like 10 minutes. Like, she'll probably blow half of you to smithereens. Whereas like this kind of Carly, it's like, oh, well, this is just going to be a bit of a disappointment. So sad times.
And now, as I've talked about before, Andy, Spike is a very confident, motivational speaker. He knows what to say at the exact right time to make sure everyone knows everything is going to be fine. He tells his beloved family, Carly, Daniel, it's only for a while. You'll be fine.
Yeah. It's only the Decepticons. I mean, it's only Galvatron. What's the worst that could happen? I'm surprised he doesn't literally say that. What's the worst that could happen?
And we see them walk towards the Decepticons, and then Galvatron adds, "Headmasters, I can't guarantee their lives if you do anything. Is that understood?" We then cut to a building. Not named, just a building. With the narrator saying, "So, the meeting commences, but talks do not progress well, as Galvatron wants all the energy, and Spike wants coexistence and joint ownership." This proceeds, Andy, to bring us perhaps one of the most brilliantly designed scenes from an animation perspective, with so little animation budget needed, that we'll ever see. Because Spike is sat at a human-sized table on quite a nice-looking chair. Then we cut to the opposite side, with Galvatron, who is sitting, as you so brilliantly put it off air, and I was going to say something else, but as you so brilliantly put it, Galvatron's in a giant wicker chair.
See, when you said he only had one demand, like actually he had two demands. The first one is that Spike's family travel. The second, really want a nice wicker chair, all right? Give me something nice to sit on.
The visual is just ridiculous, but it's great.
It is. Like, I mean, again, this is one of those would love to, be fly on the wall of, like, the animation studio at this time. Because, I mean, again, we've had a lot of kind of, normally whenever the Transformers are sat in chairs, they're kind of space chairs, for want of a better phrase. They're kind of high-tech, futuristic, metal kind of seats. And so, yeah, it's like, I mean, how reinforced would your wicker chair have to be to like hold, you know, not to cast aspersions on, you know, Galvatron's weight or anything, but like I imagine you'd need a pretty significant kind of reinforcement for like a simple wicker chair to hold a Decepticon leader, you know, cannon and all.
Maybe they've just got like, you know, because, you know, we can't see under the chair, so maybe like just under the chair. Oh, I hit the microphone as I said that. Maybe just under the chair, they've just got like a whole load of concrete.
It's like, yeah, it's like those listed buildings there where they just keep the front as like the classic building, and it's actually all just like steel and concrete behind it. Like maybe it's one of those. I don't know. Or maybe there's just like future wicker technology is really incredible, and it's just like incredibly strong.
This is where all that energy development is going to make sure wicker chairs are really strong.
Yeah, exactly. By the way, if you're new to this podcast, this is the kind of highbrow, deep thinking around Transformers that we like to provide you. So if you would like to continue to listen to all of our chair discussions, there will be plenty more, I'm sure, over the coming weeks.
I really hope. Genuinely, I really hope.
I mean, we need a hammock next. I'm just saying, like, I want to see Galvatron in a hammock.
Have we had a hammock in Transformers yet? I'm trying to think.
I feel like it's probably inevitable that there has been at some point, and I just can't remember. But I'm not sure we've had a hammock yet.
I feel like we've had something akin to a hammock, but not actually a hammock. But maybe like it ended up acting like a hammock or something.
Maybe.
I don't even. How does that even work? What I just said. You know what? I'm just gonna carry on.
Is there a Transformer that is a hammock that also like transforms into?
Right. Do you know what? Is there a Transformer called Hammock? Let's find out. Hang on. I'm derailing this podcast.
I mean, it can be some sort of like play on words of like havoc, but it's like also hammock. I don't know how that would work either. But no, I'm going to assume there is no hammock Transformer.
So I just typed in hammock into. Just typed in hammock into the TF wiki. One of the first responses, simply it says there's a commercial, and the line it points out is then spots heatwave bird relaxing nearby in a hammock.
Okay, well.
And then the next one is like a description of something, and then it says leaving Lusky to sit in his hammock and drink prune juice.
Well, there you go. So clearly hammocks have played an important role in the Transformers universe at some point. I guess is what we've established here.
I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not even going to click in the links to find out what they're in relation to. I'm just going to leave that in the ether for everybody. So you can go and look yourselves if you want.
This was like a Google whack of just like, if you can find that page, it's probably the only Google search link for like hammock prune juice that you will find. Hopefully. I mean, honestly, if there are any others, you probably don't want to click them.
But back to the very important discussion between
we
Galvatron.
We were talking about the future of the universe. Yeah, sorry.
We see Galvatron questioning Spike about his alleged neutral standing as an Earthling by pointing out that he lives with the Autobots on Athenia and demands that he return to Earth to prove that he is unbiased. Spike, being the defiant man he is, cannot comply with this, saying that his energy research requires that he remain on Athenia. My first thought was, mate, you can do remote working at this point, surely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, given that it seems like they're still using fax to send messages to each other, maybe not. Maybe we haven't quite reached that era yet.
So Galvatron offers an alternative, as a show of good faith. He says Spike must leave the thing which is most precious to him on Earth. His son, Daniel. Suffice to say, there is a shocked look on his face. Which then, Andy, leads to the quote-unquote prison hotel room location that Daniel and Carly are in. Which leads to the following family conversation. Carly says, "Leave Daniel on Earth?" Spike says, "That's what he wants." Daniel then says, "No, I don't want to. I don't want to be separated from you." We then see him running to Spike and just sort of start hugging him, but then just like hitting his chest like he's pounding on it with the base of his hand. Spike, of course, Andy, as we've already proven, is a great motivational speaker to prove that everything is going to be fine. He then says, "Daniel, please understand. If you stay, negotiations can continue. If we can develop energy together, the Decepticons will stop attacking Earth. Of which my immediate thought is, Spike, you gullible git.
I mean, yes. Yeah. I mean, basically, it's like, your sacrifice will not be in vain, son. Just like... I mean, you get the feeling that this is maybe, like, the actual, like, what's going on in Spike's head is just like, yes, absolutely, yeah, take him. Just like, yeah, go for it. You're never
He
right
destroyed a freaking Autobot archive in Season 3.
Yeah,
he needs to be punished.
Yeah, and I mean, there is... That would actually... I mean, you know, given that it seems like this story is going to continue, like, that would be the great kind of comedy episode of, like, Daniel completely accidentally destroys the Decepticons from the inside just by, like, you know, being kind of kept under their watch, that somehow he just, like, ruins everything for them.
So now at this point, Daniel is proper crying and just says, I want to stay on Athenia with you and Mum, but I'll stay here if it helps everyone. Spike, and I'm going to try and mimic exactly how the Japanese voice actor said this, okay? He literally goes, Daniel. And that's the line. Daniel then responds with, I'll be alright on my own. I can do it. And then Spike says, thanks for understanding. Carly then says, I'll stay on Earth with Daniel. And Spike then says, Carly. And they embrace. So Andy, I've got many questions. But out of all of them, I'm going to pinpoint one question I need to ask you as to how perhaps this situation could have been quelled quite a bit. Daniel has to stay on Earth. Leave him at Autobot base with the other Autobots.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that you've got to assume that Decepticons would have some stipulations around, like, where... But I don't know. Like, I mean, do they really care? Like, I mean, it's really just a ploy for, like, Spike to... Because you've got to assume Galvatron's thought process here is like, well, he's not going to say yes to this. Like, he's not going to say yes to, like, you know, you're going to be separated from your son. So it's like, well, this is the great point to just, you know, put a line in the sand that we ain't doing nothing here. So I suspect it probably kind of messes with Galvatron's plans. But oh, you are willing to get rid of your son then? Okay, cool. I had not planned for this. But yeah, like, I don't know. You'd assume that the Decepticons would then, like, make stipulations as like, no, he's got to stay under house arrest or something like that. But yeah, I mean, it's not like... It's not like they're sending him to Webworld or something. It's like it's Earth. Earth is fine. Like, you know,
they're leaving him on Shangri-La Island. You know.
Yeah. I mean, it's better than Planet Sandra. So, you know, there are plenty of worse places he could be. So yeah, I mean, that is kind of the flip side of it. Is like, it's not the worst fate ever of just like, well, yeah, you just get to go back to Earth. It might be a bit boring, but hey ho. So I guess you can argue, like, Spike's case there of like, this is not really such a big deal if it's just like a temporary thing.
So with all of that having happened, we're back on planet Char, and in his counterpunch guise, Punch is now gathered with the other Decepticons in their base. But he receives quite a shock when suddenly Galvatron walks through the door. But isn't he in the Earth negotiations with Spike? So, Galvatron in this room reveals that he plans to ransack other planets across the universe for their energy. And then Punch immediately reports this to Athenia, and that the negotiations are basically being used as a distraction to cover their grand scheme. Specifically saying, quote-unquote, agreeing to the meeting was a diversion to camouflage their attack on the universe. Of which I'm not sure if we've noticed it before, Andy, but I've only just clocked that Punch's name in Japanese is pronounced Double Spy, which is great.
Yeah, like Spy and Double Spy, also very good names. But yeah, this is again one of those moments where it's a little thing that I really like about this show, in that I think if this had been like the US cartoon, it would have tipped its hand that wasn't the real Galvatron in negotiations. Whereas in this, we get no hint of it until other characters do. and it's this whole like twist of like, oh, that actually wasn't Galvatron at any point. Wait, who is it? Which is far more entertaining than kind of, you know, being given hints that there's something up here. So I really appreciated that as just a like, okay, you've just kind of like you've just pulled the wool over everybody's eyes here, including the viewer, and that's kind of fun.
Yeah, it is fun when you actually keep the mystery element. People like that.
Yeah.
So this news of the fact that everything is a sham is relayed to the Autobots on Earth. And, funny enough, Andy, like you've just said, not wanting to tip their hand that they know, the Autobots have a cunning plan. And this gives us the opportunity, Andy, to see Shoki and Yukikaze of the Trainbots have an impromptu sumo wrestling match, which I loved.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as that started, I'm like, oh, are they gonna? Okay, yeah, they're gonna do a sumo wrestling thing. Okay, sure. I mean, it's kind of doubly fun because even like the Decepticons that are there are just like, what? And it's just like, yeah, it's like fair, absolutely.
And also, one of the Decepticons is literally just lying down on the ground like he's sunbathing.
Yeah, I mean, they seem to be having a good time on Shangri-La as well. Like, it seems to be a winner for everybody. I mean, if anything was actually going to bring everyone together, it's just like, yeah, maybe we should just holiday together more often.
But now, why did they have a sumo wrestling match? It's because it was their distraction to allow a couple of the headmasters to sneak away. We cut back to the meeting, the narrator saying, unaware that Galvatron is an imposter, Spike continues negotiating. But then Chrome Dome busts in on the meeting room, and the Galvatron negotiating with Spike reveals his true identity to be Six-Shot in disguise, which we probably should have guessed by now, Andy, because he is a ninja.
Yeah, I've kind of felt a bit stupid that I hadn't realised that. But again, let's say, like, Six-Shot, probably MVP of these episodes in this podcast, because, like, he has some very astute thinking in the previous episodes to, like, figure things out before anyone else, and he also manages to sidle into this and kind of confuse everybody with his very good Galvatron impression for a good chunk of the episode. Again, no real explanation of technologically how this works, but I guess we've had like disguising technology in the franchise before, so I guess they just reused one of those that they found in some, you know, dusty cupboard somewhere. But yeah, fair play to Six-Shot. Did a bang up job, I thought. I
completely agree, and I guess you can add that as another one of his abilities now.
Yeah, I mean, is that this is like seventh mode of just like I'm also Galvatron. I don't know. Tonight, Matthew, I will be Galvatron.
We then come to find out, us the viewer that is, that Highbrow has already rescued Daniel and Carly. With Spike having been taken as well from the meeting room, the family embrace together on the beach in Shangri-La. Everybody's happy. The world is saved. Well, for at least 2 minutes. But then, of course, nobody seems to think Decepticons are still here. So Six-Shot just shoots a tree right next to Spike, Daniel, and Carly, and half of it, like, blows up, and they're all like, ah! And then suddenly it's like, Daniel is really angry and just suddenly shouts, I'll never trust Decepticons again!
Yeah, which kind of suggests that he did trust them at some point. I'm like, really, Daniel? Come on. Like, surely you never trusted them, you know, at any stage in time, but okay.
Like, do you not remember the plant from just a couple of episodes ago?
Yeah, I mean, do you not remember every traumatic experience that you've had throughout this series, most of which are directly or indirectly caused by the Decepticons? I mean, I guess barring almost being, you know, having your dad turn to acid by Unicron, like that's probably the only thing that the Decepticons weren't directly responsible for.
At this point, a battle erupts, which means it's time to sell more toys, folks, because we get to see a whole bunch of Six-Shot's transformations. The Horrorcons are demonstrating their strength and, of course, their different transformations. The battle, though, ends with Chrome Dome seeing through the duplication ability of Six-Shot, forcing him to blow up the sand beneath him and mask his escape, because he's a ninja, don't forget. Which, of course, this then leads to my favourite line of dialogue in the episode, when Mindwipe is telling his fellow Decepticon comrades, the ninja consultant's left.
Ninja Consultant has left the building. I mean, at least, again, to be fair, I've sort of cast aspersions on his like Ninja Consultant's title as like a thing that he made up for himself. But he is actually doing ninja stuff now and not just transforming a lot. So, you know, I would like to publicly apologise to Sixshot for casting any aspersions on his qualifications, because I can see now he is a true ninja.
Justice for Sixshot. But this being said, the Decepticon Headmasters have left, but the Horrorcons continue fighting, and are doing a pretty good job of it as well, until Galvatron specifically, via communication, we are to assume, pardon me, orders them to stop and to return to Char. The villains escape via the space bridge, but as all the Decepticons are vanishing through it, Sixshot prevents the Autobots from following them by basically blowing up the space bridge. But this turns out, Andy, to have a bigger consequence to it. Because not only does that space bridge blow up, but every other space bridge linking Earth, Athenia, and Autobot installations are just destroyed. Basically, the space bridge network is destroyed. So something that we have come to know and love since literally the beginning of Transformers, something else is now gone completely.
Mm-hmm. Yep, but it was worth it for all those rad explosions.
And of course, the other effect this has done is that it's left all of the Autobots stuck on Earth / Athenia as well, with no quick way of getting to each other. This proves to be a problem for them because on Char, the Decepticons board Scorponok in sort of the flight scorpion mode. Scorponok, you know, go figure, Jeremy. So the giant craft takes off, and it sets a course for, we assume, other energy-rich planets in the universe. The narrator then tells us, and we're also led to believe that some time has passed, Fortress has put a team together to pursue the Decepticon Scorponok. And then we, the viewer, cut to, I think, Andy? A bunch of Autobots gathered on the beach with Fortress having arrived. I say I think because there's no clear indication as to how long after this is. So I just assume we're still in Shangri-La.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's probably like 3 months later, like, oh no, we are stuck at this resort and this beautiful island. There is no escape for us. We will just have to wait here until Fortress gets here. What a shame.
Oh no!
Yeah, please bartender another cocktail.
Another Energon cocktail, if you please. So, Fortress has his team ready. Then Daniel runs up and says, "Why can't I go?" Fortress then says, "It's going to be a dangerous journey." Daniel responds with, "Fortress, please let me go." Spike, at this point, is now like walking up behind Daniel, because he's been a really good parent up to this point. He simply puts his hand on Daniel's shoulder, and of course, his very poignant line of dialogue for the episode, he just says, "Daniel." And then Daniel then just turns around and says, "I don't care if you say no, I'm going anyway. Fortress, I want to help you preserve peace on Earth. Please, I won't get in the way. Let me go." And then Wheelie chimes in, "And me too."
Fortress faces his biggest crisis ever. The next episode coming up.
And then Daniel adds to this, "I can't forgive the Decepticons for tricking my dad."
I mean, all the other things that they've done to him, that's where you draw the line. Like, they killed Optimus Prime in front of you, like, multiple times at this point. Like, I mean, tricking your dad is, sure, relatively high up the list, but not kind of up front and centre, I'm going to say.
At this point, the other headmasters once again urge Fortress to take Daniel with them. It's like, what the heck, guys? Has he got you on a retainer or something? You know?
Yeah, is this some kind of like Stockholm syndrome at this point of just like, yes, no, Daniel's useful. He's really useful. We should bring him along.
At this point, Fortress says yes. And apparently, Carly and Spike are totally cool with this because they just look at each other and go,
They just go, Daniel.
just nod. Sorry, what was that?
At least they didn't just go, Daniel.
Right. We then see Battleship Maximus begin to take off, and the narrator says, Fortress leaves the situation in the hands of Ultra Magnus and Spike. Quick sidebar, what situation?
So I guess putting away those wicker chairs is going to take a while.
Continuing with this dialogue. Leaves the situation in the hands of Ultra Magnus and Spike as they set off into space in pursuit of Scorponok. The battle between the Autobots and Decepticons moves to outer space. Can the Headmasters take on the Decepticons supported by the Horrorcons? Will Maximus and the Headmasters maintain their fighting spirit? And what lies in store for Daniel? An almighty clash is about to happen in outer space. And then the episode fades to black as we see Fortress Maximus flying through space, starting their pursuit of Scorponok. And then we get the cheesy intro, and that's when we know it is truly over for this week.
We do. And it's, again, I mean, I think it's this episode, not the other one, that it's a pretty cool, like, shot of Fortress flying towards the camera. That's probably pretty simply done, but it has that classy kind of sci-fi, like, you know, Star Wars, Star Trek of just like, hey, look at this big spaceship that's flying towards you, and it's just like, yeah, this is kind of cool. This is also another really good little piece of animation.
It is very reminiscent of something like an Imperial Star Destroyer flying towards the camera.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely a bit of that vibe that I appreciated.
And that was that episode. So, I guess, Andy, should we just move straight on to TF Wiki notes, or did you have anything else you wanted to bring up that we may have neglected to mention, given everything that's come up?
I mean, all I want to say is it wasn't really a very big crisis for Daniel.
Yeah,
I
completely agree.
Really, if anything, if they called this Spike Faces his biggest crisis ever, I'd have been like, yeah, okay, sure. I mean, it didn't seem like much of a crisis for him either, but at least he had to, you know, choose between the future of the universe and his family, which is, you know, an interesting dilemma. But, like, I mean, Daniel didn't really have anything much to worry about. And, I mean, even when he was potentially going to have to stay on Earth, that was only a problem for, like, 2 minutes, and then it was fixed. So, yeah, as crises go, seems pretty small fry for Daniel.
Yeah, it does also feel like this episode could easily have been stretched into a two-parter, given the stakes that they were raising. You could have literally left the cliffhanger of the episode be, what's Daniel gonna do? You could have literally had that be the cliffhanger.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel at least this is sort of playing into kind of an arc of sorts now. We're off across the Star Trekking across the universe. So, you know, it kind of this feels like it's almost at least a two-parter in its own kind of way of like, okay, well, this is the setup for whatever's going to happen next, and this all feels like a very much talking about this as a kids' cartoon. Like they've clearly. Daniel is the audience cipher, so you can see that's why this is called it being Daniel's crisis, because they're centering him as like, oh, what if this were you? What if your parents didn't care and were quite happy to abandon you on an alien world, on your home world? Yeah. What if your parents just said your name rather than anything of substance? And you know, what if you got to go through space and fight the Decepticons? And this is a very clear like, oh yeah, this is the kids' cartoon angle of Daniel is here to be the audience cipher, but doesn't mean we can't make fun of him as grown-ups, because that's what we're here for.
Spike's toughest parenting decision yet.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. Yeah, that sounds far less interesting when you frame it that way.
So let's head over to the TF Wiki to see what they have to say about this episode, which may bring, once again, some more interesting tidbits and things to be aware of. As the Headmasters crosses the halfway point, this episode marks the beginning of a new story arc for the series. Running for the next half dozen episodes or so, the Decepticons are travelling from planet to planet, gathering energy for Galvatron's new mysterious master plan. So there's another master plan. Here we go. So Teletran 1 is mentioned by name as the computer the Autobots used to send the message to Galvatron. This is the first time Teletran 1 has been seen or heard from since Five Faces of Darkness Part 5, when it was, presumably, destroyed by Trypticon. It is never mentioned by name again in the series.
Okay. Yeah, because I thought there was a very specific moment where Teletran 2 was a thing. But
I remember Teletran 2, but I might have to do a little quick search for it.
and unless that was maybe just like, because I mean that was part of the kind of, replacement of the voice actor for Teletran as well, so maybe that was like an internal thing that wasn't actually ever outwardly spoken, but I thought it was. I thought there'd definitely been a Teletran 2 like at some stage.
Based on the TF Wiki page for Teletran 1 specifically, they say Teletran 1 was evidently rebuilt by the Autobots' secondary command post on the planet Athenia in 2011. The only time it is referred to by name is when it was used to transmit the message to Galvatron in the episode we have just discussed.
Okay.
So I guess with that being said then, let me type in...
I mean, I like the idea that he was just Teletran 1 is just rebuilt as a fax machine now. And that all it can do from that, like, all singing, all dancing computer now, all it can do is just, like, send Galvatron a fax message.
I swear there is a Teletran 2. I must be losing my mind.
Yeah, I mean, we are sharing that same delusion, if so, because
There's a freaking page for Teletran 3!
But yeah, I mean, how many Teletrans do you need, really?
Okay, so the only thing that we can both remember, Andy, peek behind the curtain, everyone, we've been looking this up, but to save you having to listen to all the discussion, we're just going to trim this down. Basically, we recall that it was Trypticon that was involved in the destruction of Teletran 1 because it was when the Ark exploded in the volcano. So that definitely happened. One would assume at this point that probably has to be season 3-ish. that happened, because Trypticon wasn't introduced until then. So it was definitely in season 3, but we cannot pinpoint the exact episode right now, can we, Andy?
No, we cannot. But yeah, there were definitely 2 Teletrans. We have not gone mad. That's the most important thing.
There we go. So back to the episode at hand. So trivia. Jar, spelt Jaar, the Japanese name for Char, is romanized in this episode as Jarl. Jarl.
No, okay.
Sure. The episode is also known by the title, The Most Important Thing in the World. This title originates with the ancient list of the Headmasters episodes that has been on the internet since man rode around on dinosaurs. But precisely how it came to be called this is a mystery that will likely never be solved, because, although it's perfectly appropriate as a title for the episode, it's not even close to the actual translation. Frustratingly, because this oh-so-old episode list was the basis for most online The Headmasters episode guides, this is actually the title that the episode is most frequently known by. Very interesting trivia note there.
Yeah, and to be honest, it would have been a better episode title given what we've just discussed. So I would have preferred that, but there we go.
This episode marks the destruction of the Space Bridge Network, which is treated as a big deal. Its impact is questionable, though, as by this point in the series, every Autobot is able to fly, and seemingly break orbit, and they frequently use Broadside and the train bots, not least Maximus, for interstellar travel.
That's the thing. I think that's the part that they miss here, is like not making it clear that other methods of transport are a lot slower or something. Because yeah, like that's the problem. I mean, even when you get to like season 2 and you have like, Starscream just like flies through space and gets places relatively quickly, it kind of reaches this weird point of like, yeah, you should probably have written this lore a little bit better so that there's an impact to the space bridges blowing up and not just being like, oh well, I guess we just have to fly places now.
Yeah, it's a fair point, because I mean, obviously at this point it doesn't really matter, but there is just that element of, it's something, like I said, that's been part of Transformers since the beginning. It sort of feels like there should have been a bigger deal, even like from a sentimental point of view. It feels like they could have honed in a bit more on it, but again, it's a kid's cartoon, and this isn't Transformers the movie, so,
No. Okay, it's even kind of surprising. I'd have thought they might have, like, played up on, like, the energy angle again, of just being like, hey, it's a lot more efficient to use the space bridge in terms of, like, energon use than it is to, like, fly places, so this is a setback for the Autobots in terms of their dwindling resources or something, but yeah, it's just like, oh no, the space bridges blew up. That sucks.
So, we then go on to foreign localization. Got a few interesting ones in here. First of all, Andy, the Shout Factory subtitle in English is simply Daniel faces his biggest crisis ever, minus the 2 exclamation marks. The Omni Productions English dub has the episode title called Danny, the Little Hero.
I mean, he doesn't even do anything heroic in this episode. Like, this really... I don't know where they got that one from.
Oh, but... Andy, this is the Omni Productions dub.
Well, yeah.
So there's more to this than just that.
And we go say, like, has he ever even been called Danny by anyone in this series also?
Well, you'll be happy to know that in the Omni Productions dub, Mindwipe notes that the Horrorcons wear the Autobot symbol.
Okay. Fine.
And in the Omni Productions dialogue script for this episode, Apeface is called Sailor, spelt S-E-L-A, and Snapdragon is referred to as Wimpus.
I mean, having said how cool a name Snapdragon is, like, clearly not as cool as Wimpus.
Whilst Counterpunch is called Carter.
Okay.
Just that dub. So... Okay, so we've got some other things here. In Italian, the episode is called A Pact to Save Space, which is a pretty good title, actually. I like that.
Kind of like that.
In Mandarin, it was called Daniel's Painful Choice. Then in Spanish, they're being a bit direct here with what's going on. In Spanish, they call the episode Galvatron's Trap.
I mean, that is definitely a bit of a spoiler.
So there is a big note here, which I'm going to read and we'll see how this goes. The Spanish translation for the Headmasters cartoon presents some problems with Snapdragon's name. On Snapdragon's first appearance, Galvatron calls him Zela, Z-E-L-A. However, it's a bit hard to understand Galvatron. If you don't listen carefully, it sounds like he says Zedda, Z-E-D-D-A, which has caused further confusion. Then, Snapdragon presents himself as Ozela, O-Z-E-L-A, after which both the narrator and Chrome Dome call him Zela, Z-E-L-A. Later, Hardhead calls him Zedda, and finally Galvatron calls him Zela again. This would seem to make Zela his official name, since it's used the most frequently.
That's always the kind of thing I find fascinating, because I can understand, like, for the original production where things are maybe changing around quite a lot, that, you know, and maybe, like, toy names haven't been fully decided on, that there can be mistakes. But you'd have thought for, like, localized dubs, there's the character, what are we calling him? What's the toy called in this territory? Bosh, job done. It's kind of crazy that they have these kinds of issues, but hey-ho.
And apparently the Spanish dub also saw Mindwipe mention both the Horrorcons have the Autobot symbol, but to impact this further, he says this just as the Horrorcons' Decepticon symbols shine on screen.
Yeah, you see, that I at least I can understand as, like, a translation kind of error, because, you know, they mention about, like, not seeing the insignias. I can see that is maybe phrased in such a way that a direct translation would make it seem like the Headmasters were saying that they have Autobot insignias, and you localize that a bit wrong, and suddenly you lose the intent. We've all been there, like, translating stuff from Japanese and making those kinds of mistakes. So I can see how that could happen.
So there we go. That wraps up that second episode, Andy. Any additional notes that you wanted to bring up, or anything that we may have missed in terms of discussing things? Anything at all?
No, I don't think so. Like, yeah, like we said at the top, like, a couple of interesting episodes conceptually that didn't necessarily have time to explore everything they could have done. But yeah, I mean, you know, we're set up for another interesting kind of little story arc here. You know, once again, the Decepticons have managed to blow something up. Again, once again, the Decepticons have succeeded in a plan, kind of. Like, you know, I mean, I don't know how much of the blowing up the space bridge was all part of the grand plan. But, you know, they're ahead of the game again, which, you know, continues to be an intriguing thing from the US cartoon continuity, where they never really got that for more than, like, 10 minutes at a time. But, like, you know, if you were like calling this as a boxing match, like they're way ahead on points right now. Like, you know, they've blown up a couple of planets, they've booted up Scorponok, they've now kind of, but not quite stranded, you know, the Autobots so they can gallivant around and collect more energy. Like, they're in real good shape. So yeah, it's kind of, you know, it's a very interesting shift from what we've been used to from prior seasons.
Indeed, and yeah, both episodes very easy to watch. I enjoyed both of them. They're not they're not offensive is the word I was actually going for by any means. Perfectly good, and like you said, has set up a new story arc, and we're very intrigued to see where it goes. And I've just got this sneaking suspicion Daniel is going to have a massive part to play in how this entire thing wraps up.
Yeah, I mean, everything seems to be playing into that possibility that he's going to have a pivotal role. But again, this series has also blindsided us a bunch of times by setting things up and then us finding out, like, no, this will never appear or be mentioned again. So who knows? You know, maybe we'll just never hear of Daniel again at this point.
Maybe Daniel just going to decide to live on another planet and not even tell his parents.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they'll bump into Rodimus on their travels now, and it'll just be like, oh, I'm just going to hang out with you now, and Rodimus will be like, Daniel, and that'll be the end of that.
And he'll just be like, oh, Daniel.
Yeah, it's just like,
please.
Yeah, it's just like, what was that thing I did to try and kill myself to get into the Matrix again? Maybe I'll do that again.
Twice.
Yeah.
From there, everybody, next time on the podcast, we will be discussing episodes 19 and 20 of Transformers Headmasters, which, Andy, I can tell you, bring you the following episode titles. Episode 19, Fight to the Death on Planet Hive.
Cool. I mean, I feel like I saw this somewhere as being Planet Beehive, which is not really very different, but somehow sounds way funnier. But yeah, Planet Hive sounds a little bit cooler.
And then episode 20, Battle for Defense of the False Planet.
That's quite a lot of title. Cool. Yeah, I don't even know how. I don't know. That sounds interesting. I'm trying to figure out what a false planet might be. So yeah, I'm intrigued.
I mean, look, at the very least, Andy, we know we're getting battles.
Yes, yeah. Well, hopefully. Well, I mean, I don't know. It might be a battle like Daniel had a crisis. We can't tell yet.
It does make me wonder, actually, from the naming conventions of these episodes, they have a very good way of keeping certain words in the title to kind of make it feel like they're part of one story. I wonder if this little arc that we're going into, each one is going to have the word battle in it.
Yeah, would not surprise me.
Oh, well, there we go. So, everyone, as mentioned, those will be the episodes we are discussing next time, which will be available in a few weeks' time from the date of publishing this particular episode you are listening to now. If you would like to find us on social media, you can find our Twitter and Instagram accounts under the name StarscreamsPod. We do have a Patreon page as well at patreon.com/StarscreamsGhost. We don't charge for anything. It's simply a long-term audio archive solution for the podcast. If you've listened to this episode wondering, where can I see the episodes that we are discussing? We're following the UK Metrodome 2004-2005 DVD collection, which, if you're watching a video version, you can see behind me on the shelf about there. There you go. That's what that little set is. But all the episodes are available on YouTube. If you search for them, you'll find them just fine, and you can join in the fun on that. Andy, before we wrap up for today, anything else we should note to our wonderful listeners today?
I mean, I suppose we sort of slept on this a little bit while we were talking about these episodes, but we are now past the halfway point of Headmasters, which I think that's a landmark that we should celebrate a little bit, especially given when we started doing this, we weren't sure whether we were going to go all the way with Headmasters. Like, we were like, we'll give it an episode or two, we'll see how we're feeling, and like, here we are. we are very much, we are on this boat to the bitter end at this point, and we've been kind of having a good time. So yeah, like, we're here for the long haul with this, but we're, as Bon Jovi might say, we're over halfway there.
There you go. And also, what's the point, Andy? The next episode that we'll be recording, podcast-wise, will be episode 41. So what we're doing right now is episode 40. That in itself is kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't feel like we've done that many. I mean, God, how many important Transformers chair facts have we imparted during those 40 episodes? Please, if you've been keeping a tally, please do let us know.
And realistically as well, it's actually more than 40 that we've done it as well, because we also had a few bonus episodes in there as well. So we have done more technically as well.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. But yeah, we'll be at the half century before we know it. So maybe
we go.
Maybe Daniel will have done something useful by then.
I do actually partly wonder. I almost don't want to look it up now, just so I get surprised. But I do wonder how many what episodes of Headmasters do we have, and will it take us to the magic 50 number, or do we have to stretch this out a little bit?
It should do easily, because I mean, yeah, we've still got a good like 20 something episodes of Headmasters to go.
Oh, blimey, do we?
I think so, because I think it's 40 something episodes, isn't it? Or closing in on 40.
There are 38 episodes total.
Yeah, there we go. So yeah, so that's another good, like, you know, 9 or so episodes that we've got. So yeah, that'll take us to 50.
Wow. We literally didn't even plan that as well, did we?
No, there you go.
Well, there we go, folks. Thank you very much for listening and or watching. From myself, Jeremy Graves, from him, Mr. Andy Hanley, we've been Starscream's Ghost, a Transformers podcast. Until next time, in a few weeks' time, as mentioned from when this episode is published, take care and speak to you soon.
Bye, everyone.